Dude, you already came out with a mock draft.
Yeah, league-wide, we have to, every beat has to do that. So
how quickly? I have a hard time changing my brain. Like, do you?
Yeah.
I have a hard time. Like, okay, now
it's
I
funny.
gotta get
Last year it was the Super Bowl, and then it's like it was the parade, and then the next week I left for Indianapolis. My wife was like, "There literally is no off season this year. It's been a little different, right? It's been a good 4 or 5 weeks, yeah."
Yeah, seriously. But I mean, no shortage of storylines, but you're home talking about
exactly.
them.
Yeah, you're home. Exactly.
You know what I mean? Welcome into Scoop City on a Wednesday. I'm James Fulmer. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're going to be with you throughout the course of the entire offseason with all of our writers across The Athletic, giving you everything you need to know about what's going to happen in each building when we're getting ready for 2026, the draft, free agency, all of it. Like and subscribe. You'll get everything right here. Speaking of that, we are going to touch base on what happened with Klint Kubiak in his introductory press conference with the Las Vegas Raiders. What could we expect for him, Maxx Crosby and company? We'll cover that, as well as Sam Darnold and his impact on what's going to happen with the Vikings this season. Yes, his former team. And could they be adding to that quarterback room? We'll touch base with Alec Lewis on that. Also, what's happening in Philadelphia? Always, we're really wondering, what's happening in Philly. Zach Berman's going to cover everything with Sean Mannion and how that offense could look different with Jalen Hurts. Let's kick this thing off, though, with what I mentioned, Klint Kubiak, the Raiders, and a man who knows it well, Vic Tafur. All right, one of my good buddies, Vic Tafur, joins us now covering everything for The Athletic, but spent a lot of time with the Las Vegas Raiders, spent a lot of time with the Raiders when they were in Oakland. You know this organization probably better than anybody we work with, Vic. The first thing I thought of when I see these Hall of Famers come out for this press conference was, and I believe you were there too, when we were there, and the lunacy that was up in Oakland when John Gruden got the job, and there was a red carpet, and there was people with Chucky dolls outside. Why is this going to be different than what we've seen over the years? Or will it be the same?
No, it's a good question. Obviously, they have a lot of these over the years. I think they're just they're kind of set up well. I think they set up with the first pick in the draft. They did the research. I think this coaching cycle did not really wow me, but of the 10 job openings that there were, I think Kubiak is pretty high on the list. I think as far as qualifications, coming off a ring Sunday, did a great job again, just having the control of his offense, what he wants to do. As soon as he reads defense really well. So obviously he's not the huge personality that Gruden is. He's kind of, we saw yesterday, kind of a quiet guy. That's fine. I mean, who cares if as long as you're drawing up winning plays, the rest you can figure it out. So I think, assuming they get Mendoza in the first pick, they have definitely a play caller. They have some offensive talent. So I think there's a plan in place where Raider fans can at least say, hey, this makes sense. What we're doing now makes sense. Let's see how it works.
Yeah, I agree, because I kind of want to stick with that personality you hinted on there with Klint Kubiak. We've seen a lot of rah-rah. We've seen a lot of looking back in the past to the black and silver and paying homage to that, and maybe just almost a lot of mouth service in a sense. Klint isn't that. And if you know his dad, Gary, and I was a beat reporter for him for a few years in Houston and in Denver, they don't say much, but they get their point across, and they don't back down. What I was curious about with you is, you have Tom Brady and John Spytek running this organization, essentially. I don't think many people may know this, but I don't see Klint backing down to Brady just because of the way he's wired. He may be quiet, but him and his dad have something to him to where Gary was able to handle Peyton Manning and bench Peyton Manning, which nobody's really ever been able to do. And he's been that guy with John Elway as well. Big personalities, big egos. And I'm kind of curious if you think even though he doesn't say much, you get that same vibe from Klint Kubiak.
Yeah, I do. I think the whole Kubiak family is definitely quiet confidence. Definitely they've kind of paid their dues and they've kind of, they've won. He has a pedigree now with a ring. So I think definitely can kind of say, hey, this is what I think, and he's not going to back down too easily. At the same time, I'm sure, like, in terms of, like, everyone else know about Maxx Crosby. He mentioned Max yesterday. They had coffee yesterday. I mean, they can have a matcha today, but it doesn't really matter because that's not going to be his call. It's going to be Spytek and Tom Brady as far as what happens with Maxx Crosby. So obviously there's some things out of his control, but for the most part, I agree with you in terms of the football part of it and the day-to-day and what they're going to run. I think he'll definitely have his ideas and stand by them.
Yeah, you want me to date myself here, Vic, real quick. I attended Klint Kubiak's pro day at CSU, at Colorado State University. I was there to watch Klint Kubiak, safety for the Rams, Get him up there. Go through his pro day. So now he's the head coach of the Raiders. You mentioned Maxx. I don't know what else Klint could say in that press conference, right? No. Other than what he did. Where does your gut really tell you this is going to go with Maxx Crosby? Because you've covered him for a long, long time.
Yeah, obviously I'm not there now. I haven't talked to him recently, but I do think Danny Rossini and Jake Liz are on the right track. I definitely think this is kind of probably run its course at this point. I think it was telling that Maxx was not there. I mean, he was in the building, I guess, but he wasn't at the actual press conference. Whereas a year ago, he was like in our front row and center with Pete Carroll, and I just think he wants to win. He's definitely paid his dues. And you hear about, Mark Davis afterwards was asked about him at the little scrum and said, he's a Raider. He wants to be here. And that was true of Josh Jacobs and all the guys before him, Khalil Mack, all these guys who were great players. So at some point, it just runs its course and they need a fresh start. And the team needs to, at this point, a bunch of draft picks would be good for the team to kind of get more talent and kind of young talent and rebuild with this new staff and these new young guys they have on the team. So I think at this point, I'd be very surprised if Maxx Crosby was a Raider next year.
Yeah, I agree with you, Vic. And the same time I don't know if Maxx is going to be very vocal with this. I think he can get it out there without saying anything. And at the same time, I don't know if you want the face of your franchise, the best player on your team, essentially, who doesn't want to be there, and you're forcing him to be there as the way you want to start your new regime as the first time as a head coach. If you're Klint Kubiak, and you're right, there's plenty of holes on that roster, and we can get into it of all the different things that they could do with the draft capital they could get from Maxx. You mentioned Mark Davis. That relationship with him and Maxx. Do you see that playing into Maxx's favor, perhaps? I know there's some people around the league that think that's the case, to where, Maxx has done a lot for this organization. Not to say they'd take less capital, but they might want to find a proper landing spot for him. Where do you think he could potentially land? If you had your pick, just throwing it out there, where do you see Maxx going?
Well, there's a lot of teams obviously could use him. You mentioned the Lions.
All of them?
Yeah, all of them. Yeah, there's a hometown team for him, the Lions. Like the 49ers make a lot of sense. The Buccaneers. The Patriots. I know he's mentioned he likes Vrabel's energy. Who doesn't? So I just think there's a lot of teams where could use him. He's obviously not just a pass rusher. He's also gotten better against the run. He's kind of a set the culture kind of guy as far as his work ethic. He's not like a rah-rah leader, but he's definitely a guy who's like he always says he's there at 6 a.m, first guy in, last guy out, which definitely can show young guys how to do it. So I just think there's a lot of teams that want him. And I think Mark Davis, he wants to win, and obviously he wants to start players to stay Raiders, and ideally, but like Josh Jacobs was a guy he absolutely adored. So Josh Jacobs left, and so I just think that's, if it's time, you've paid your dues, and I think it's best for everybody to leave. Mark's not going to stand in the way and say, no, he has to stay here, I think, at this point. I thought yesterday it was interesting that I've done a bunch of these. This is the first one I haven't done in terms of these new coaches' press conferences. I think it's the first time that Mark was not on the stage. He was not. He actually was in like third row, whatever. I think he's trying to take more of a back seat and kind of let the other guys drive the engine now. So I think we saw it yesterday. So I'm not sure it's Mark's decision anymore. I think he's deferring to other guys now. So I think if they decide, the football people decide it's time for Maxx to go and he wants to go, Mark's like, that's fine. I just want to win. However we get it done, whenever it happens, I just want to win at some point, because it's been now, I want to say 24 years since they won a playoff game. So that's an amazing number. And I'm sure it makes Mark sick. So.
Yeah, I agree with you. That was one of the things that I thought had a different feel to it when I heard, our boy Will Kiss announcing all those guys going up there, and I'm like, I don't see Mark Davis up here. I don't see him up here, and that did feel a little bit different. As you've been to a lot of them, I've been to a couple. Let's get to on the field a little bit. I think people have maybe just the way the Raiders season went, Vic, and the way the season transpired, and forgot about what 2 years ago was like with Brock Bowers and how unguardable of a player he was. I kind of got this sense, and you were there for the Super Bowl and know a lot about that Seahawks offense as well. Like when I see all the different ways Klint Kubiak found to put Jackson Smith and Jigba in different spots and had an offense maybe even focused around one player essentially. He had 44% of the receiving yards. I'm kind of excited to see what Klint could do with different spots he can put Brock in and find favorable matchups. Do you see that being something that he leans on early because of the versatility and how tough of a matchup Brock is?
Yeah, I think if you're Kubiak and you're taking this job, because clearly he could have stayed. He said it was a no-brainer, but he could have stayed in Seattle for a year and got another job next year if he wanted to. It would be easy call on his part. But I'm sure he looks at the roster, looks at Brock Bowers, looks at Gentry, and these are guys who can be really exciting pieces for him to work with, I think. And also, he's going to defer in the Mendoza question, but clearly he's done his research on Mendoza, and the Raiders have. So there's a pretty good idea he's their guy, number one, that must excite Kubiak at some point. So I think in his mind, he's got Bowers, he's got Gentry, he's got Mendoza. Just got to fix the O-line just a little bit and make it, a professional one. Last year was not professional offensive line. So I get that going, and that's a good start for him as a play caller. It definitely is a nice foundation for him to work with and can build around the Bowers and those guys.
Yeah, I think you're right. He's a guy that will not get away from the run either, which is something that, you picked a guy in Nash and Gentry that high. Let's make sure we use him and find different ways to use him. I wanted to pivot real quick and talk about a former Raider that you know well, as surprise, somehow all of the insiders across the NFL at the same time came out and reported that Derek Carr would like to come back and possibly play football. How wild that works, Vic. What do you see in terms of Derek and where this could go this year? Because I think it's you mentioned Mendoza, after him in the draft, Vic, it might be, we'll see. So this quarterback landscape with some teams and the names in terms of Kyler Murray or Tua or Derek Carr is kind of a wild, hodgepodge group. Where do you see Derek fitting into that? And are you surprised that he wants to come back?
No, I saw him last year at the Tahoe golf tournament when he retired, and I told him I wasn't buying it. I'm not buying his retirement, and he kind of deferred, oh no. I'm like, yeah, whatever. So I'm not surprised. Clearly, I think that he didn't want to go out the way he did. I think he's still young enough, and he still can throw the ball enough. Where, like you mentioned, there's some really bad quarterbacks in this league. So Derek Carr definitely could jump in tomorrow and be probably 15 to 20, I would think at this point,
yeah.
But. I don't know. I think he wants to win. Obviously, everybody wants to win. I'm not sure if those jobs are available, but like you said, I don't know if he wants to be a guy who competes with someone, like you want to compete with a young guy like, JJ McCarthy or or just be a backup and kind of work his way in. So that's up to Derek as far as what his level of desire is, based on if he wants to really, if it's a start or bust, or if it's a good team or bust. He's got some options. Clearly has some things off the field which work well for him. So I'm not surprised. I think he will come back. I think he's depends on him if he wants to be a backup or actually just come back just to start or not start.
Wait, this is kind of breaking though, Vic. Was he swinging a golf club with that shoulder over there in Tahoe? I heard this shoulder was debilitating. We couldn't play football anymore.
No, he played in the golf tournament last year. It was, what was it? When was that Tahoe thing? Was that in July or August? But yeah, I'm not sure if he was playing 100% or 80%. But and he was at that point deciding if he was going to have surgery or not. I'm not sure what he actually did. I don't think he did, but he thought he could do it without surgery. So I think it was just a matter of with New Orleans, it run its course. And he also wasn't feeling well. He didn't want to come back and be somewhere where he wasn't playing till November, December. So he decided to retire. And I'm sure at that point he thought he was going to not play, but in the back of his mind, I think he always thought, I can still do this. And I'm sure it still talks to him about, the way he went out was not the way he wanted to go out. So I'm not surprised at all by Derek coming back.
Yeah. Hey, walking away from $30 million though, Vic.
Yeah, Yeah, I guess, but he's got a lot of money. I don't think with Derek, I think he's got plenty of money, so I'm sure he could. Who knows?
Yeah, tough problems. Okay, last one. Essentially, I heard this from a couple of candidates and agents and other people around the league when they interviewed with the Raiders. It was some candidates came away, Vic, going, "I'm not entirely sure still who runs this team." Like Brady was there for some of them. Brady wasn't there for others. I believe Joe Brady was having his interview with the Raiders while Brady was calling the NFC Championship game in the same day. And so what should we keep our eye on as this offseason continues and we go through this first one with Spytech and Tom and all these different pieces? What should we be watching for, Vic?
It's a good question. I think there's people in the building still who have no idea who hired Chip Kelly last year. I think no one really ever took credit for that one, like if it was Brady or if it was Pete Carroll, if it was somebody else. So therefore, was a question mark of who has the final say. Yesterday, Davis was asked about Tom Brady's role, and if it will grow this year and be more. He's like, well, we have to wait and see. So I think it's definitely a question mark. I think you have the other owners who are in the background kind of taking on a stronger role for sure. And I think with Brady, he'll probably And my guess is when they start winning, he'll start saying, "Oh yeah, I was a part of this process." And until then, he's like, they stink. I'm just kind of in the background. So, but I'm sure he's involved. He was involved last year. I'm sure he's heavily involved, and I'm sure, I think like you mentioned, Spytek is a key guy at this point. Him and Kubiak must have a sense they can work together and build a roster up, and that's really where they're at. I mean, they're so far from winning, I think, at this point. Just try and build a roster and go from there.
Yeah, good point. And I don't think anybody's going to put their finger or their name on that Chip Kelly hiring. But you're right. There's definitely some similarities and some connections between Spytek in Denver and Kubiak in Denver. Yeah. And there's definitely some carryover with some people that they mutually know. And I know that Spytek respects and asks the opinion of, in that building specifically, about Klint Kubiak. So they seem to have gotten their man, Vic. We'll see if we're doing this again next year. I hope not. I did like how Klint did.
I'm on record. No chance.
No chance, right?
He gets 2 years at least. Okay,
perfect. On record. Love it, Vic. Appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of some time before we see each other at the Combine, man.
All right, boss. Take care.
All right, coming up next on Scoop City on a Wednesday, Alec Lewis joins us. What impacted Sam Darnold's success in Seattle? Not just the Super Bowl, but how they played as an offense. Impact what Kevin O'Connell and company want to do with J.J. McCarthy? We'll break all that down next with Alec. All right, welcome back to Scoop City on a Wednesday. James Palmer with you. Alec Lewis joining me now, who I just have to say this, Alec, before we get started. The reporting that you and Diana Rossini did together on Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, outstanding. And I just wanted to put that out there in the beginning. One of the best articles I read this year, honestly, in terms of giving me stuff that I had no clue was happening. So happy you're back, buddy. What's going on?
Thanks for having me, first of all, and thanks for saying that. I wish the common folk understood the time and what that story entailed from a lack of being able to be a human standpoint. I mean, Diana, we were on calls Saturday afternoon. She's got her boys running around, screaming in the background. And I will also say, Dan Steinberg, who helped edit that story, was spectacular. And it was one of those stories that is a great reminder of what that type of editor can do. So thanks for saying that. It was, I wouldn't call it fun. It's never fun to see somebody lose their job, but it did, for me, reveal a lot of things about both the Vikings organization and the NFL as a whole. So appreciate that.
Yeah, really good point. And we could get into that if you'd like, but I want to start there actually before we get into some of this quarterback talk and Sam Darnold and what's next for J.J. McCarthy, who else could be joining that room, all of that. What is the timeline, you think? Because they do essentially have, do you call Rob an interim GM, essentially? They have somebody they know so well, and the ownership trusts so much. Can they take their time filling this role, like, i.e., wait a year for George Paton's contract to expire? Can they, just in terms of their timeline and who they're looking at, where do we stand at the GM spot?
Yeah, they have said, I mean, ownership and Mark Wilf made it pretty clear on the day that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, it was announced that he was let go, that they're going to wait until at least May 1st to really begin what they've described as a thorough process to replace Kwesi Adofo-Mensah in that general managerial role. It is my understanding that Rob Brzezinski is going to shepherd this thing until that point. And in the past, I mean, you mentioned it, Rob Brzezinski, for those who don't know, is someone who has worked for the Vikings since 1999 when Red McCombs was the owner, and has seen as many changes, transformations, both within the league and the Vikings team, that he would have as much institutional knowledge of where they've been and where they want to go than anybody in the past. I don't believe he's really sought the general manager job. He's worked mostly as a salary cap whiz and just liaison with ownership. But this could be a point in his career where he feels like, look, you know, I've worked for this organization for 27 years. I know what it's like to manage these personalities. Why not give it a run in this job? And then if you need evaluator help, maybe down the line, that's where a guy like George Paton could come in. So I fully expect Rob Brzezinski to get a look for this job. And I think it's deserved, considering the amount of respect he has from all parties of the organization to kind of get the train back on the tracks.
Yeah, you're right. And I think coaching staff is a big part of that as well in the way that they feel about Rob as part of this. You mentioned kind of getting a chance to see how the NFL views a variety of the people that fill this role. And I say variety because a lot of them in the general manager role in the NFL now, Alec, come from different backgrounds, right? And there's been this surgence of maybe this Harvard, Ivy League analytical side of the general manager coming in. And I do think anytime you look outside the box and make a move outside the box, it is, if it doesn't go well, criticized across this league that is just embedded in doing the same thing over and over again. And that's why I think a lot of teams, in my personal opinion, don't take a lot of risks, because when you go outside the box, it does get criticized in a sense. Does this move that didn't work with Kwesi make the Vikings just almost locked to swing the pendulum back the other way and go more the traditional NFL route of just, we want to evaluate talent and who does this guy know and has his family worked in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, if they are to bring in external evaluator chops in that lead personnel position, it is going to be that old school scout who spends 14 hours a day buried in the film room and, nitpick. Yeah. Clicking over and
just
over.
Just working the controller.
Because, I'm a tape guy. I love it. But I will say this. If I've kind of taken anything, me personally, from the path that has been in terms of hiring Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, who was a Wall Street trader who entered the NFL through analytics and obviously got to the place he did and the last 4 years played out the way they did. If I kind of take anything from it, it is this role, being the general manager in the year 2026, is less about what is your background than it is about, can you get an entire organization to come alongside you and to believe wholeheartedly in the processes and the decisions that you're making. The way I've compared it, it's like a coach with the locker room. You hear all the time, has that coach lost the locker room? And the general manager role is like, do you have the faith of the front office? Do you have the faith of the coaching staff? Do you have the faith in people on the business side of the building that how you're operating can lead you to that ultimate destination? And so however the Vikings approach it, it would be from my analytical seat, it's hopefully you do it with that in mind. And I think it's a lesson externally. Like you look at John Schneider in Seattle and you hear how much Mike McDonald wanted to work with him. And you see a staff that has a lot of conviction in the decisions he makes. And I think that is so important in that seat in this era of where the NFL is, regardless of where that person comes from or what they've done getting to that role.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And oftentimes you're at your best, and we've seen this in the NFL, Alec, like if you have the trust of the ownership to, i.e., take chances, make mistakes, correct quickly, and pivot from the mistakes you make and make sure you don't put the organization back too far. I think that's the similarities you see in, say, John Snyder or Howie Roseman, who have a ton of trust from ownership to go out and make these decisions and go out and take some of these chances and think outside the box at times, but also don't get too far away from what makes them really, really good talent evaluators. You mentioned John Schneider, and he just won a Super Bowl with one Sam Darnold. You wrote an article on The Athletic. Everybody go and read this. What the Vikings can learn from how the Seahawks supported quarterback Sam Darnold. I think that is a big part, the word supported, in that title. Alec, I think we put too much on quarterbacks in this NFL because there are so few of them that can just carry teams. What did the Vikings do wrong? What did they learn when you put this piece out that they can change for 2026?
Yeah, I've reflected so much on my year covering Sam Darnold and how I just wrote about him on a week-to-week basis. And I think early on it was like an inherent skepticism of how real is some of the production. And then he struggled throughout the middle of the 2024 season. And it's maybe this is the real Sam Darnold. And then he has a great back half of the season. You're like, how could the Vikings move on from this guy? And then the last two games go how they go. And it's like, what decision are they now going to make for the future at the quarterback position? And I think if anything, what I've reflected on, and what I hope the Vikings have too, is an understanding that you can have the Sam Darnold level of quarterback play if you have such an elite defense, airtight special teams, and a run game that is serviceable. And I think so often, over the last few years, in terms of evaluating and analyzing the NFL, it's like this binary thing of you either have the Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, or you have the rookie quarterback contract, and thought less about as coaches always say, like the complementary football nature of what do we have in all of these phases, and how does that dictate the level of quarterback play we actually need for this specific team. And so that's where it's an interesting conversation of, if you bring Sam Darnold back in 2025 for the Vikings, do you have the other elements of that team at a certain bar that allows you to get to the place that Seattle did? And so for me, it will inform how I probably think about how these teams are structured and designed moving forward in a complementary sort of way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's hard because the contract just keeps going up no matter how talented the quarterbacks are. The number for the position keeps going up. It's almost like no quarterback was like, you're right, I am worth $30 million. Like no quarterback wants to say that, you know what I mean? And that's, I think, what we're going to be looking at when, Carolina and Houston are going to have to make these decisions over the next year or so about, are we going to give these guys, CJ Stroud and Bryce Young, $50, $60 million contracts because that's where it's going, but are they playing like a $50, $60 million quarterback? And yes, then that contract hinges upon what we can do with the rest of the roster. With that said, you mentioned it. Some of these teams are looking to bank off of that rookie quarterback contract. The Vikings are in that group. Where do things stand with J.J. McCarthy? What kind of leash do you think he has in 2026? And what kind of offseason do you think he needs to have to get maybe this thing turned around? What are they looking to do?
Yeah, he needs to have a massive offseason, both in terms of just the amount of conviction that he supplies to the team, in terms of the work habits, in terms of leadership, in terms of just the consistency on a day-to-day basis. And then you could dive even deep to the mechanical side of how he needs to rework some of his fundamentals when you're talking footwork. I mean, there's potential for a more even drastic change a la Josh Allen early in his career. So it'll be interesting to see how far he goes in terms of trying to tweak some of his motion and mechanics. But this is a fascinating situation in that Kevin O'Connell has been very open that he wants competition for the 2026 season, and they don't want to repeat the mistakes of 2025 where they don't have a quarterback room that allows them insurance in the event of JJ struggling or in the event of injury. And so the question becomes, how can you acquire a quarterback you have a certain amount of trust in while you're also still committed to JJ McCarthy? Like, if you're not guaranteeing the starting spot to a free agent or a potential acquisition, are they more willing to go somewhere else? And so does that dictate the level of quarterback play you're then pairing with JJ McCarthy? And these are conversations that are happening on the third floor of the TCO Performance Center right now. These are conversations that agents are very aware of and cued into over the next couple weeks. And I mean, the Vikings are going to make and have to make a big decision in terms of the type of quarterback they try to bring in to engage in that competition and provide the quarterback room overall. And it's going to be fascinating to see how they try to go about that.
Yeah. With that said, I know they haven't said it publicly, but do you get the sense that anybody there is concerned right now that they made a mistake with J.J. McCarthy?
I would say no, in the sense that, over the long haul, do folks internally believe that JJ McCarthy can be a really talented quarterback? Absolutely. The problem is, and I've told a lot of people here this, because you've had a lot of fans locally say, look at Sam Darnold's arc, and it took him 7 years to get to the place at which he has gotten to. And I fully understand that. And on one hand, quarterbacks need a lot of time to develop. But you juxtapose that with regimes, front offices, coaches don't have 5 to 7 years, especially if they're entering their 5th season, not having won a playoff game, and they have a player in Justin Jefferson on the roster who expects to be in that conversation every single year. And so threading that needle and maintaining faith in J.J. McCarthy is almost like this diametrically opposed thing. It's just really difficult to continue on this path of long-term quarterback development when you really need short-term wins. And that, I think, component and those circumstances are widespread throughout the NFL and have probably affected quarterbacks and their development and teams and coaches and front offices for a long time.
Yeah, it's one of the conversations, and we have hundreds of these over the course of our time covering this league, Alec, that Brandon Beane told me several years ago. We don't have Josh Allen if Terry Pegula doesn't tell me you guys have all the time in the world with Josh Allen. That doesn't happen from most owners, right? That is not a universal opinion across the league. And you said it eloquently there about the way that this all works, and everybody's looking to make sure that they keep their job. And patience is something that, just as Bean said to me in that conversation, we don't have patience as a society, James. We don't have patience specifically in the NFL. And so that is a big part of the way this works. Do you see somebody, and I talked to Vic Tafur a little bit earlier in the show about Derek Carr. Do you see Derek? That's a hot name with the Vikings. Do you see him going, I could go there and I could maybe win the job, or I could be part of that room? What do you see in terms of the other names that could be potentially thrown around as pairing with JJ?
Yeah, the names that are common and frequent and make sense are, I mean, you talked to Vic, but like a Mac Jones, could you acquire a guy like that? Mm-hmm. Kirk Cousins has familiarity with the system, familiarity with the place. The idea of that brings very passionate responses from people here. Geno Smith would be another guy, if you could acquire him, who has, you could probably convince yourself that plugged in this system with these circumstances, it probably looks better than it did in Las Vegas. And then Derek Carr is another name that definitely would be able to run this system, certainly. But the question is, with a guy like that and with a lot of the names I just mentioned, if you aren't committing to those guys being a starter, again, yeah, exactly, from a money standpoint and also just from a guarantee and pitch standpoint, are they more willing to go somewhere else? And so you get into a very complex conversation to where then you're asking, well, if you can't acquire those guys, what are you trying to pair this thing with maximum upside with acquiring a guy like Anthony Richardson? It's a tough kind of needle to thread. It's a tough situation to be in, and it's part of the risk you run when you go this young quarterback route. Like, you just run the risk of ending up in a situation where you're trying to kind of damage control it to where you give yourself a floor that makes it serviceable.
Yeah, it's so difficult, Alec, that I do feel like, and this sounds skeezy in a way, you almost as an organization and as a head coach have to talk out of both sides of your mouth. You need to tell JJ he's the guy, and when you talk to these guys, you need to tell them you have a legitimate chance to win this job. And so I feel like you have to do that. That's essentially, you mentioned with Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones in Indianapolis, that's kind of the way it went down there. And you got to kind of find a thread that needle is the best way you put it, and I think that's the only way you can put it. This is fascinating. We're probably going to continue to talk about this. We could talk about it for the next couple of hours, but you've been grinding, man. You deserve a little bit of break. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for hanging out with me. Appreciate it, and I know we will be discussing this further.
Anytime, James. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the kind words. And it's a very interesting kind of fork in the road point for an organization that hasn't won a playoff game since 2019, has never won a Super Bowl, and the people here, I think, are on the edge of their seat to get to a point at which they feel like that's possible. So it's going to be interesting, that's for sure.
Fascinating. Love it, man. Appreciate the time. We're going to stick with offensive football and our debate about if it's going to be successful in a building or not, because Zach Berman joins us next, a new offensive coordinator once again in Philadelphia. What should we see from Jalen Hurts and company? We'll have that next on Scoop City. All right, moving right along. Welcome back on a Wednesday for Scoop City. James Palmer here with you. A good friend of the show, Zach Berman, covers the Eagles brilliantly for us here at The Athletic. He joins us once again. And Zach, I was going over this. I'm going over questions. All right, what can we talk about? What kind of discussion can we have? And right off the top of my head, I go, all right, I'm going to ask Zach, which one of these is he keeping his eye on most in the next several months? Is it Lane Johnson, Landon Dickerson? Is it A.J. Brown? Is it Dallas Goedert? Is it how this offensive scheme, when you talk to people, come together? There's like no shortage of really things that you have to monitor this offseason. And oh yeah, Jeff Stoutland's gone. That one you probably won't be able to tell as much until you guys hit the field in Philadelphia. But what are you looking at most right now that you say, I, Zach Berman, need to keep my eye on blank?
Yeah, the operative word is right now. And right now, it's A.J. Brown and A.J. Brown's status, because I think that's the big one here. Whether he wants to stay in Philadelphia, whether he wants to trade, whether the Eagles trade him, take on that cap hit for the compensation that they would get back. And so I think that's the biggest offseason question, because the complexion of the offense looks totally different one way or the other, if they have AJ or they don't. I understand the Lane Johnson, Landon Dickerson questions. I think those have to do more with how those players feel physically. And I think the Eagles will have a good sense of that going into the combine and into free agency. It's the A.J. Brown question that really lingers.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And what's tied to that? And I wanted to ask you this because I feel like we're not focusing on this aspect enough. Everybody's debating where is A.J. Brown in his career. Some people I talked to around the league say he's right at the peak. I'm not sure if there's better football ahead for him. I'm not sure. There's varying opinions on then where he'll be playing, what fit he could be having, what would be the compensation, all of those things. The other receiver in Philadelphia, in Devontae Smith, when I have conversations with people around the league about him, Zach, I would be kind of excited. Now, these are other teams, right?
Sure.
Excited to see what Devontae Smith would be like as a true number one and utilized in a more variety of fashion within an offense. Is there any thought in that building of just like there's so much more to Devontae Smith than what we've seen so far in his young NFL career?
You hit it on the head, James. Absolutely. And frankly, I think this coaching staff hasn't done enough to maximize Devontae Smith during the past 2-3 years in terms of how to use him, different ways to get him the ball, where to get him the ball, how to get him the ball. I think he can be a high volume receiver. I think when we just saw Jackson Smith-Jigba, the season he had, I'm not saying Devontae Smith can have that season, but I think Devontae Smith can be a comparable type of player. And but where I would push back is I don't think it requires Devontae being the unquestioned number one for that to happen. I know it's easy to kind of draw the parallel. The Seahawks trade DK Metcalf, Smith-Jigba has that type of season. I saw, for instance, in 2022, AJ and Devontae combined to just give defenses nightmares. And that's what the Eagles need. So whether AJ's here or not, they need to maximize Devontae Smith.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's up for the building to figure this out. And I was talking to a coach the other day about this, and we were kind of having, I hate to say it, a laugh about it, but I want to know where things stand in Philadelphia right now. Essentially, his take was this. I feel like there's so many of us around the league that envy the way that Philadelphia Eagles organization operates, right? How forward-thinking they are, Zach, and how they're able to put this roster together and how he operates and how that building works. And it's almost an envy of some people when you talk to them around the league. But at the same time, there's that adverse time that comes up once in a while where everybody says, wow, man, that building seems to be a bit dysfunctional right now in how it's operating. It's funny to this coach about how both of those things can be true about the Philadelphia Eagles. Where is the building right now, in your opinion?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the term dysfunctional. I've heard similar
what would you use? Ruckus,
to what you
like
intense.
Uneasy place, tense?
Tense. Intense, for sure. And it's they won 11 games and it's intense. They won 11 games and everyone has their antenna up like, man, we need to win. We need to fix this, right? And it's interesting when it's framed that way because there are other franchises here who, when they win 11 games, everyone gets contract extensions. But it's the nature of Howie Roseman, Jeffrey Lurie, kind of the environment, the culture they've created is there aren't many true down years, and but what to the point of being forward thinking, they do try to see if that dip's coming, when that dip's coming, and try to get ahead of it. And I think this is a crucial year for the Eagles. Like if there's any regression for the Eagles this year, then I would imagine there will be changes because you can kind of see where it's going. They need this change here, if you will, to look more like 2024 than, let's say, 2020. And I bring up 2020 because that was a point where the Eagles lost in the opening round of the playoffs at home. They have some changes to their offensive coaching staff. They're trying to implement different schemes in there. And it was just a disaster that year. And the next year, there was a complete change in terms of coach and quarterback. I'm not saying it'll get to that, but I'm saying the Eagles need this to be like what it was in 2024 when Kellen Moore comes in. There's a different coordinator, and you just see it turn back the other way, and the Eagles go on, win 14 games, win the Super Bowl.
Okay, well, let's stick there then. Back when Sean Mannion comes in, you mentioned Kellen Moore. There was a lot of people that said, okay, we're not seeing what we thought we'd have from Kellen Moore, although they do win the Super Bowl. But it didn't seem like the offense looked that different in a lot of people's eyes. I think there were some differences that maybe people overlooked, but that's neither here nor there. Now into 2026. Sean Mannion, is it going to look vastly different from what we've seen? Is Jalen Hurts going to be under center? Are we going to see some things that really look different than what they've looked the last couple of years? And is Nick Sirianni giving Sean Mannion that runway?
Well, to the latter part of the question, yes, he is.
Okay.
He is giving Sean Mannion that runway. That's been clear. To the overall question, it better look different because one of the best assistant coaches who has come through Philadelphia is no longer here. Mm-hmm. And I think a big reason why is there are going to be scheme changes, in particular with some of the run game concepts and how this offense is going to look. You've seen coaches from the outside come in, mostly from that Shanahan-McVay tree, and that's not an accident here. I think this offense will incorporate more under center, will incorporate more motion. The caveat is in all the buildings, you're trying to build around your quarterback, right?
Yep.
So they need to maximize the quarterback. So conversations that we're having now, there were some of these conversations when Kellen Moore took over, and the offense, I agree, it did look different than kind of the years prior. But I think Kellen Moore adjusted to the personnel that he had. And so the question becomes, is this going to be what you see in San Francisco and Los Angeles and Minnesota and Green Bay? Or is this going to look closer to kind of what the Eagles have looked with some of those wrinkles in it? And a lot of that depends on how Jalen Hurts is best utilized.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I want to make a clarifying statement here because I feel like as this conversation has gone on, and it's been in the public eye quite a bit, Zach, about is this a Jalen Hurts quote-unquote problem or you have to work with Jalen Hurts. I want to make this clear because I was actually having a conversation with a coach about Patrick Mahomes and the way he plays just yesterday. And it was specifically this. Pat is a feel quarterback. You need to have an offense that is and players around him that play with that same sort of feel and spatial awareness style. My point is your offense needs to play into the style of your quarterback because that's the best quarterback on the planet, and everything doesn't work for Patrick either. So this isn't a knock on Jalen Hurts the way he operates. Yeah. You have to work within what makes your quarterback his best. And if that's very specific for Patrick Mahomes, obviously it's specific for a lot of other quarterbacks, and you need to find a way to make it work. So I kind of want to make sure that we're not just throwing shade on Jalen over and over again as we debate on how this offense is going to look.
I'm glad you brought that up because I do think that's important to note. I'll defend Jalen on this every day. What every franchise is looking for is a quarterback who you can win a Super Bowl with. Mm-hmm. And the Eagles have won a Super Bowl with Jalen Hurts. They've been to another one with Jalen Hurts. Every year he's been the starting quarterback. They've been to the playoffs. So I would imagine most offensive coaches you talk to would sign up for that, right? Because that's difficult to achieve. Now there are things that, as you know, I think Jalen needs to use his legs. I think that's part of what makes him special. There are nuances to the passing game that, as he continues to grow in his career, he can continue to add and evolve. And he's shown in his career that he can add different things. But yet, to the bottom line, Jalen Hurts wins games. And that's not an accident. It doesn't happen every year for 5 years unless he's able to do it. So I will defend Jalen every day on that.
Yeah, I love that we had that conversation right there, honestly, to be fully true. That Mahomes thing just popped into my head, and I was like, you know what? We got to stop having this through just one lens with Jalen, in all honesty. Okay, before we go, Micah Parsons came out and said, I almost went to Philadelphia. We know that Howie swings big. Maxx Crosby's the name that's out there, Zach. Do you think Philadelphia would either be in or out? We know Howie always makes the phone call. But do you think they would legitimately be interested in, say, trying to make a trade for Maxx Crosby?
Great question. 1 year ago, I would have said yes. Now I would lean toward no, depending on the price, of course. And the reason I say that is because Howie, I think, sees a shift here in terms of how they're going to have to pay players. And they're going to need to use premium draft picks on the offensive side of the ball. They've spent the past 3 years really loading up on defense. They've drafted well. They have young, cost-controlled players on defense, and those players are going to be eligible for contract extension soon, whether it's Jalen Carter, Quinion Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Jalix Hunt, Nolan Smith. Jordan Davis, you go on down the list, right? There's a lot of players there. And so it needs to shift in the other direction here. And to get Maxx Crosby, I imagine you're giving up premium draft picks, and the Eagles are going to need that to add to their offensive line. They haven't drafted an offensive line in the first 2 rounds in the purse since 2022. In Howie Roseman's time, since he came back, he hadn't gone back-to-back years without doing that. So that's why you don't have this pipeline that you've had in the past. The pass catchers in this offense, they drafted a pass catcher or used a pick on a pass catcher for the first 2 rounds from 2018 to 2022. They haven't done it since then. So you're going to need young wide receivers, a young tight end in the building here. And if you give up your first-round picks for the next 2-3 years, it's going to be harder to add to that offensive side of the ball. So that's why I think a year ago I would have said yes. Now I'm less inclined. But with Howie, he always makes the call. If the price is right, he'll do it.
Yeah, that's outstanding. I totally agree with that. And that's funny, the way that pendulum has been swinging for Howie. It's like, hey, we have this offense. We're paying this offense. Guys, we need young, defensive, cheaper talent. Now we got to swing it back the other direction a little bit as well. Zach, appreciate it, man. We'll be seeing you soon, hopefully in Indy. We can have a cold one. How about that?
I look forward to it. Thanks, James.
All right, brother. I hope you guys love these shows as much as I do, jumping inside all of these facilities across the NFL, getting the inside scoop with these guys who know these teams better than anybody else on the planet. I want to thank Vic Tafur. I want to thank Alec Lewis. I want to thank Zach Berman, all of them for joining me. We're going to have the league covered across this offseason, so stay with us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. James Palmer, I will see you on Thursday.
Thanks for watching Scoop City. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and feel free to leave a comment. New episodes of Scoop City drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday.